Will the Atlanta Falcons trade up for LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels? Let's break it down on Mock Draft Monday.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. If you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And, of course, been covering the Falcons for far too long, far too long. Formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And we thank each and every one of you that goes strong with us each and every day as an everydayer of this illustrious podcast. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is a Mock Draft Monday. Later in the episode, we'll be talking about the salary cap increase and whether or not that's going to help the Falcons pay for some higher price free agents like a Kirk Cousins. But we'll begin the conversation talking about another quarterback option for the Atlanta Falcons, which is Jayden Daniels. And I'll talk about why I'm not as sold on Jayden Daniels as this, franchise quarterback as maybe other people are. But we'll talk about that later. And we'll start things off talking about the most recent mock draft that we break down here on Mock Draft Monday, which involved the Falcons trading up for Jayden Daniels. And we'll talk about whether I think he's worth that. But let's talk about the trade itself. And this mock comes from our guy, Josh Kendall, as well as several other beat writers over at The Athletic that dropped this past week. And Josh, picking for the Atlanta Falcons, had the Falcons trading up from 8-3 with the New England Patriots, giving up this year's first, next year's first, and this year's second to move up to that spot. And let's break down the price tag a little bit, because if we look at past precedent where the Eagles back in 2016 in the move to get Carson Wentz went from 8-2 to make that pick, they wound up giving up 2 firsts, a third, a fourth, and a future second. And then when you factor in the very next year that the Bears went from 3-2 and gave up 2 thirds and a fourth, right? So basically we can calculate that the price from 8-3, right? If we just take the 3 and the 4 that to go from 3-2, right? Take that out of the price to get from 8-2, right? That will lead you with 2 firsts in a second, right? So I think Josh is pretty spot on, at least based off of those recent high-end quarterback trades. And we've talked a lot this offseason about how plan A for the Falcons at the quarterback position is trading up for a quarterback, and presumably Josh did the thing that would be their plan A. So I think if the Falcons can get up and get one of the top 3 quarterbacks at a reasonable price, presumably they would do it, right? Now, later in the episode, we'll maybe throw some cold water on whether or not they do that for Jayden Daniels, but for the time being, we'll assume it. And I think Josh, in his blurb for the Falcons pick, he nailed it when he said, the Falcons tried patience at quarterback last time, drafting Desmond Ridder in the 3rd round and convincing themselves that would work. It didn't. Owner Arthur Blank and CEO Rich McKay say they think this team can win now with a good quarterback. And that's basically the root of why I think plan A is to try to get one of these top quarterbacks in the draft. Now, we've also heard from Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network that he's hearing, some of the buzz that he heard coming out of the Falcons coaching cycle with some of the candidates there, that it seemed to be ownership wanting to push for at least the higher levels of people in the organization looking for a young quarterback. And so that would justify the Falcons, pulling trigger on the quarterback at some point in round 1, right? And we'll see how that goes. Again, I don't think DJ is making this up, so I'm sure his sources are sound in that regard. And certainly this would be music to my ears, because that's kind of what I kind of hope the Falcons will wind up with is a young rookie quarterback that they can develop for, hopefully be the next quarterback for the next decade or more. But I got to take every rumor, at least at this point in time. We'll see how it all plays out. At this point in time, with a grain of salt, right? Because we've heard a lot of rumors about what the Falcons are going to do and what to do at the quarterback position over the last 3 years, and a lot of those have been wrong. So we'll see. We'll see how that all plays out. But, as far as that goes, I am in wait and see mode when it comes to all things draft, especially with the quarterback. I try not to obsess about what's going to happen in April, in February, because we have other steps in the process to get through, like free agency, which over the next 3 weeks, we're going to get a lot of answers about what the Falcons and as well as the other 31 NFL teams are going to do this upcoming draft, because they're going to make free agent moves. They're going to have significant ramifications. And as I've said before, if I haven't said it on the podcast, if the Falcons do sign Kirk Cousins, that's going to almost certainly take them out of the running for taking a quarterback in round one. But, I always say, let's get through March 1st, and then we'll worry about April when April comes around. But I know that's not how people think. So, I've seen a lot of speculation. People sort of speculating that the Falcons might trade up from 8-2 with Washington. And that doesn't make any sense to me. And this is one of my bigger pet peeves, where you get fans of one team making suggested moves, speculating on moves that only really factor in one team's perspective, right? Why would Washington make that trade, right? Like, if we're assuming, and again, most people seem to be on the same page with this, if we're assuming Caleb Williams is the Bears' number one pick, right? Where's Washington's quarterback coming from? If they trade out of 2, they just passed on their chance to get a quarterback. They're not signing Kirk Cousins. They've already been down that road. So what other free agent quarterback are they going to get that's going to allow them to pass on whoever QB2 in this draft? It doesn't make any sense for Washington to trade out of 2, right? It doesn't make any sense for them to trade out of 2. So they're almost certainly going to stick it at 2. So any trade talk, any trade up scenarios that people have where the Falcons go from 8-2, to me is like extremely unlikely. It's borderline ridiculous, if you ask me. Now, again, maybe something happens in the next 3 weeks where Washington, they're all in on Justin Fields or whatever, and they decide, maybe, but I don't see that happening. So to me, as Josh portrays it, I think the most realistic scenario for the Falcons to trade up is to get to 3. We'll talk a little bit about another scenario where maybe they could not trade up to 3, but maybe trade up a little bit later in the draft, but we'll get to that later. But I think the point of all this is to say, like, because Washington is probably going to sit here and take their time trying to figure out who they're going to take at 2, I don't think a trade up is going to happen anytime soon. I think it's almost, if a trade up is going to happen to 3 or 4 or wherever in this draft, it's not going to happen until the end of this process, because basically everybody's waiting in line to see what Washington does before they can realistically trade up. Because this is, I think, one of the other pet peeves I have, which is people spend too much time on their mock draft simulators and think like the mock draft simulation and how they stack the board is how all NFL teams rank their draft boards. And there's 32 different draft boards. And, there may be teams that have Drake May and Jayden Daniels in their top 3. There may be teams that have none of those guys in their top 3. There may be teams that have one of those guys in their top 3 and then the other guy like 14 or something like that. And so if you, for example, if you have Drake May number 2 on your draft board, if you're the Falcons, and you have Jayden Daniels number 13 or 14 on your draft board, you're not going to, and Washington takes Drake May, you're not trading up for Jayden Daniels. If you think there's 9 other better players that are going to be on the board, right? And so that's the thing that needs to play out, right? That's going to matter. And I think that's something that people need to pay attention to, and they need to keep in mind that, like, just because you are in a mindset of I'll take whoever's 3rd, I'll settle for QB3 in this draft. As a fan, that doesn't mean that these NFL teams, including the Falcons, are going to do that. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to see play out. And ultimately, we'll have our answer on April 25th or whenever the draft is, right? 2 months from now. But, until then, we got to let this whole process play out. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind, before you go too crazy on speculating about what the Falcons are going to do, and we don't even know. So let's talk about Jayden Daniels. And I'll admit right now that I am not as high on Jayden Daniels as other people are. I've spoken to a bunch of Falcon fans over the last month that seem to be of the mind that like Jayden Daniels is their preferred option, whether he's QB1 on their draft, on their individual fan-made draft boards or not remains to be seen. But he seems to be a very popular option to a lot of Falcon fans that I've spoken to over the last month. And that's fine, right? At the end of the day, all we're doing is just guessing on what we think a quarterback is going to be, right? And I know some of you guys are, when I say some certain things about Jayden Daniels that aren't necessarily as flattering as you would like, you're going to get upset and you're going to get in the comments and, but I'll sit here and pump the brakes. We're all just guessing. No one knows. If you like a quarterback and I don't like the quarterback, that's fine. If I like a quarterback and you don't like the quarterback, that's fine, right? We don't have to spend every single day on the internet fighting about quarterbacks as we have done so often over the last 3+ years. That is my least favorite part of being a football fan on the internet is having to fight every day about the quarterback. So I just want you to let you know that you can take a breath, calm down, relax, right? Before you hit send on that comment coming up. But if I'm the Falcons, I'm definitely in the camp of trading up for Drake May, not so much in the camp of trading up for Jayden Daniels, and we'll break down why as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, basketball season is here and now, and I know the basketball season for the Atlanta Hawks is not going great, especially in lieu of Trae Young getting hurt. But, there's other ways for you guys to get buckets with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your first bet wins. And whether, this Hawk season may be done, so maybe you're not as interested in betting on the NBA, or maybe that fuels your fire to get something out of value out of this NBA season. So you can go to FanDuel, get those quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive player props, and so much more. You can bet on NCAA. March Madness is right around the corner. Or you can bet on NFL draft props, right? Bet on Jayden Daniels' destination or Drake May's destination or whoever's destination. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, I want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube, the first of its kind. Locked On is an innovator and an icon, giving you all the biggest stories from all the biggest leagues and national shows and the local experts as well, all on Locked On Sports Today. And if you want more local flavor, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So before you guys come for me with the pitchforks, I do like Jayden Daniels, and I have no problem. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, the Falcons did a terrible thing if they traded up for Jayden Daniels or somehow land Jayden Daniels, however they land him. I'm like, I get why other people are intrigued for Jayden Daniels. He's just not necessarily my cup of tea, right? But I think the two things that the two biggest selling points of Jayden Daniels, especially for a team like Atlanta who's looking to become more explosive, is Jayden Daniels' running ability and his vertical passing ability. And we made this a similar argument last year, like last March, when we were talking about the potential of the Falcons drafting Anthony Richardson on a mock draft Monday back then, right? Similar things where, like, if the goal is to get more explosive, which should be a priority for this Falcons offense, a player like Jayden Daniels as well as Anthony Richardson is an easy path to get in there, right? And a lot of that has to do with his running ability. I think he's arguably, I would argue this, so arguably, and I think it's a winning argument, that he is the best runner at the quarterback position since Lamar Jackson came out, 6 years ago, right? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say he's like the best vertical passer I've seen in some period of time, because I think there are plenty of guys in this year's draft class like Caleb Williams and Drake May and Michael Penix Jr., as well as guys like Richardson from last year and Levis as well, that were also really good, throwing the ball down the field. So I don't know where Daniel stacks up in that group, but he's good. He's clearly very capable in that regard. His ability to link up with Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors a bunch this past year was a big part of LSU's success. Both of those guys are expected to be very high draft picks. Malik Neighbors possibly a top 5 pick. Brian Thomas Jr. might be a top 20 pick or something like that. So, what's interesting about Daniels is I think the conversation around him is very similar to the Justin Fields conversation, because a lot of selling points on Justin Fields is the running ability and the vertical passing ability, right? Those are his two biggest strengths that he's bringing to the Atlanta Falcons offense. And it's interesting to me because we've talked about Justin Fields as not necessarily being the greatest fit in what we expect from a Zach Robinson offense, right? Going forward, again, we can speculate on that all we want. And so if Justin Fields is not a great fit for that, then why is Jayden Daniels a great fit for that? And, I know differing opinions exist out there, but I'm certainly count myself as one of the skeptics on whether or not the Falcons will be interested in Justin Fields. Pretty much everybody I talk to who covers the team is also shares that skepticism. If not, outright denial in their interest in that, but we'll see. We'll see, if all of us are looking silly in 3 weeks, but I sit here and I go, like, if that's true, let's say, just go with me. if you're unwilling to give up a second round pick for Justin Fields, why would you be in this scenario be willing to give up 2 number ones for Jayden Daniels? I'd be skeptical of that, right? Now Daniels is younger, not by a huge degree, like a year and a half, basically younger than Justin Fields. And that's the interesting thing about Daniels is he's an older prospect, but I don't think he gets talked about like we typically talk about older prospects. Usually older prospects are seen as less than younger prospects, right? But Daniels is a 5th-year senior, spent 3 years at Arizona State, transferred to LSU, spent the last 2 years there. I remember watching Daniels when he was a freshman and sophomore at Arizona State because I was watching Frank Darby back then, after that 2021 draft. You saw Daniels obviously blossom into a Heisman Trophy candidate. But like, because I had seen Jayden Daniels, I went into the season not very sold on him. Now, to his credit, he did improve. Obviously, he played lights out. But I kind of went into the season seeing him as more of a day 3 mid-round sort of guy, and he made a big jump. And now I think he's certainly merits a first-round pick. But I'm not as sold on him that he's like this, top 10 sort of talent that other people seem to see him as. Like I wonder a little bit about him being kind of that late bloomer, right? And you sort of contrast that with, say, an Anthony Richardson who brought a similar skill set, but you also saw Anthony Richardson being as raw as he was, being a 1-year starter in college. You did see some flashes of some sort of high-level quarterback traits with his sort of decision-making, his pocket awareness, those sorts of things that made people excited about what he could be with more experience at projecting him forward in the NFL. And I'm not sure that Daniels flashes, the high level quarterback traits that make me want to project him long-term as like this high level quarterback. Right. And it's basically boils down to something I've told other folks, which is like, if you take away his running ability, which, obviously you're not going to be able to do, but hypothetically speaking, if you could, let's say he twisted his ankle and wasn't going to be as effective as a runner, are you looking at Jayden Daniels as a first-round quarterback prospect outside of his running ability? Like, that to me is the thing that makes him special. So it doesn't mean that I think the rest of his game is bad or anything like that, but it does give me pause that it took him 5 years to get to this point. And the where he's at, I don't know if he's at the same place that I think some other quarterbacks, and including some in this draft class, that are at by year 2. And so that makes me a little bit worried that he may be, in other words, kind of maxed out as a player, and that you're going to come into the same issues that you see with Justin Fields right now, which is a lot of concerns about decision-making and processing and field vision and whatnot. And I see other similar holes in Jayden Daniels' game that makes me not as enthusiastic about what he's going to be in 3 to 5 years. Like, that's ultimately what it kind of boils down to me. Like, when I'm projecting some of these quarterbacks, is like, what are you going to be in 3 years, right? 3 to 5 years with NFL coaching. And I'm not sure if Jayden Daniels is going to be significantly different from what he is. Now, what he is right now, I think with his running ability, with his passing ability, can be an effective starter in the NFL. So let me make it clear. I'm not like sitting here going like, oh, he's a bust waiting to happen. I think he can be a good starting quarterback in the NFL. I just wonder if we're going to be having a similar conversation about him as we're having with other quarterbacks that, particularly have to rely heavily on the run game early in their career to kind of make up for maybe not necessarily being the most effective passers, is sort of my concern with Jayden Daniels. So we'll see how that plays out. And we'll leave the Jayden Daniels conversation aside on today's Locked On Falcons. But if you want to be a Locked On Falcons insider, you will get more insight into Jayden Daniels this week, because he is the prospect that I'll be breaking down for those folks. We just did Drake May. We already done Caleb Williams. We've done JJ McCarthy. We've done Michael Penix Jr. We'll potentially do, some free agents as well when we get into March. So that's something is worth signing up for. The link to become a Locked On Falcons insider is in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. It's a 14-day free trial for 14 days, 2 weeks. Try it out. Get the Jayden Daniels stuff. Get all the past ones, including the extended all 22 reviews. If you want to go back down memory's lane from, games in October and whatnot. And, after the 14-day free trial, it's $4.99 a month thereafter. And you also not only get access to all this film reviews, you also get that one-on-one connection with me. And you can be like, Aaron, why are you horny for this player, as someone did last week? And you're allowed to talk that spicy to me if you're a Locked On Falcons insider. But if I see that comment, you got to get up out of here. But Locked On Falcons insiders can talk spicy to me in the there. So that is where you guys can join at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. So hit that link in the description. But we will be wrapping up today's episode talking about the increased salary cap bump and whether that's going to help the Falcons, which may allow them, if they choose not to go down the Jayden Daniels whatever route in the draft, does that mean that they can be more aggressive giving out a big money to a big ticket free agent like Kirk Cousins? This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and a lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. I know if I had a little bit more time during this pre-draft cycle, I'd be able to grind a little bit more film, but how would you use your extra time? A better way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters most to you so that you can do more of it. Therapy has benefited me, teaching me coping skills like I can only control what I can control. I can't control who the Falcons quarterback is, who they draft, or whether or not they win on Sundays. But there are things that I can control, and that's better for me to focus on those things and best use my time to do so. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, I cannot recommend enough to give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely done online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. So obviously, this week is Combine Week, and so we'll be covering, all of that stuff. Hopefully, we'll get some guests to sort of preview some things. Had a couple of people hopefully lined up this week, but they had to punt till next week, so we'll see about that. So we might get some post-Combine reactions from the guests, but we'll see what's in store for your first listen as the week unfolds. But let's talk a little bit about the salary cap bump that the NFL officially announced that the 2024 salary cap is going to be $255.4 million, which is a slight bump. I can't remember what the previous projections were based off of, but it seems like it was like $10 to $12 million more than what some of those projections were. And now the Falcons, according to overthecap.com, are projected to have $33 million in cap space. I think previously it was somewhere around $20 million. Now, when you look at effective cap space, which factors in how much cap space the Falcons are going to have after they sign their rookie draft class, it's more like $27 million. But as we noted last week, they can increase the cap space by making some cap cuts, clearing up to around $20 million by cutting guys like Taylor Heineke, which would clear $7 million, Jonnu Smith, $6.5 million, Lorenzo Carter, a little shy of $4 million, and Mike Hughes, a little bit more than $3 million. And I think we might also add Ade Ogundeji to that list because playing time escalators increases cap hit in 2024 to $3.2 million, and the Falcons can clear nearly all of that by cutting him. So about $3 million, $3.2 million cap, and I think $3.1 million in cap space they could gain by cutting him. The question is going to be, are the Falcons going to cut him ahead of training camp or wait to training camp like they did with Michael Walker last year? We shall see on that front. The Falcons can also restructure some contracts. They can do a max restructure, which means lowering the base salary of a player to the veteran minimum, and then converting the difference in those figures to signing bonus, spreading that over the life of the remainder of the contract. And that would allow them to clear nearly $2 million if they did that with Younghoe Koo's contract. Jake Matthews would be about $9.5 million, and Grady Jarrett would be about $7.5 million. So in theory, if the Falcons cut all these guys and did all these max restructures, they could get to a point where they're over $60 million in terms of cap space. So that's a lot of chunk of change. My guess is they'll probably get to somewhere. They'll make some cuts, maybe a couple of restructures, and we'll get to north of 40. I don't know if we're going to get north of $60 million, but that puts the Falcons in a very decent cap situation. I don't think it's as rosy as some people will portray it, as if like, oh, the Falcons can just go out there and spend money willy-nilly. Like, their cap situation is basically league average over this year, next year, and in the next couple of years, right? In large part due to, they gave out some big contracts last year to like Chris Lindstrom and Jesse Bates and David Onyemata and Caleb McGarry. And the bigger cap hits in those deals has yet to kick in. So that's going to tighten things up. They also are going to potentially have to give out second contracts to guys like AJ Terrell and Drake London and Kyle Pitts over the next year or two. And that's also going to be a burden on their salary cap situation. Not to mention, if they go out there and get a veteran quarterback that they have to pay, like a Kirk Cousins or Justin Fields, like, Fields, you can defer that payment to next year. But if Fields comes to Atlanta and is successful, you're going to have to give him a big contract next year, right? And so, like, I'm not suggesting that the Falcons, because of this, are going to revert back to cap hell, but they are one or two contracts away from being a little bit tighter in the wallet than I think a lot of folks realize, that are suggesting that, their cap situation is great. So, that may be fueling one of the reasons why the speculation is that they may prefer a young quarterback on a rookie contract than going after a veteran like Kirk Cousins. But as I often say, beggars cannot be choosers. But I think the bump does help them when it comes to specifically if they were to go after someone like Kirk Cousins, right? I think it makes affording his contract more tenable, because we're all assuming that Kirk Cousins, like he has done the last 6 years, is going to sign a fully guaranteed contract for like 2 or 3 years. And I was already sort of throwing some numbers around, looking at like, okay, what if the Falcons gave Kirk Cousins a 2-year, $80 million contract, and they could structure in a way where his initial cap hit in 2024 was like $12 million. His subsequent cap hit in 2025 was like $44 million. And the rest, about $24 million, would be spread out over some voidable years that they would tack on at the end of the contract. But in theory, this salary cap bump means that they may not need to do that with the voidable years, right? And you could see a cap hit in year one for Kirk Cousins, something approaching $20 million or whatever. And with the Falcons presumably having $40+ million in cap space, that would still leave them over $20 million, to go out there and sign other free agents. So I think what this bump potentially does, if the Falcons are going after Kirk Cousins, right, a big money quarterback like that, it means that they can be a little bit more creative with how they structure that contract and fit him as well as any other free agents that they go after this offseason. So, I think if the Falcons are going to spend big, it's either going to be a quarterback like Kirk Cousins or it's going to be a pass rusher is my best guess at this point in time, but we'll see how that goes. So, last thing on Kirk Cousins and contract stuff is, if I've said before that Kirk Cousins is kind of plan B in my eyes for the Falcons at quarterback. If they don't think they can go and get one of the top 3 guys, plan C being just stick at 8 and take JJ McCarthy. We'll see how it all plays out. But, if Kirk Cousins does make it to market, which is an open question at this point in time, but seems more likely than I think some people think it is. I think the biggest competition for Kirk Cousins, if the Falcons are going to bid for him, is going to be New England, right? And New England has twice as much cap space as the Falcons do. So they could theoretically outbid the Falcons. And, if the Falcons are going to max out at like 2 years, $80 million, New England can say, oh, well, we'll give you 4 years, 160 or something like that, maybe theoretically. And of course, New England's picking 3. And so in a world where they do outbid the Falcons for Kirk Cousins and stay at 3, and probably are going to stick at 3 and take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3 rather than trade back, that does open the door for, a trade up from 8 to 4, or, anybody going to 4 with the Arizona Cardinals where they're picking. And we know that the Cardinals, as we saw last year, where they traded back from 3, with Houston so that they could go up and get Will Anderson. I think Arizona will be definitely open to trading back in this draft. So there's a scenario where you don't necessarily have to trade up to 3, maybe, I'm trying to think of what the price tag would be from 8 to 4 as opposed to 8 to 3. I don't know. Like, you probably still have to give up 2 firsts and a 2, but maybe you get back like a 4th or something like that. I don't know. Something like that. So, maybe it's 2 firsts and a 3 and a 4 or something like that. Who knows? But that will be interesting to keep an eye on. So that's why I sit here and I say we got to be patient. We got to let free agency play out before people get too obsessed on what the Falcons are going to do with the draft. Because if the Patriots or the Falcons go out there and sign Kirk Cousins, that's going to have major ramifications for what happens at the top of this draft. And so we'll have a clear picture for the Falcons situation in 3 weeks. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Until then, we'll be back with more tomorrow. Check out, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel. Become a Locked On Falcons insider. Get more film breakdowns of Jayden Daniels. by hitting that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every